It's the nudge of a text message that draws the attention of Nicholas Cameron to his phone just after midnight on July 9, 2021. The 39-year-old knows the sender, so he answers it. He then gets up, grabs his white terrier named Misty, and escorts her out of his 20th floor apartment, which sits on Sturt Street in Melbourne, Australia. He walks over to the elevator and presses the button. He steps out on the third level of the car park and walks toward his red rental car. As he's walking, Misty senses something or someone. As he reaches his car, a man comes out of the shadows. Misty is frightened and scurries away. "You and me gotta talk." Moments later, neighbors heard shouting, a plea for mercy, and then a car alarm. They heard Nicholas screaming for help, saying, "Oh no, no, no," and "Stop, stop." The struggle lasted for 10 minutes. At 12:07 a.m., 2 constables arrived on the scene and met a neighbor in the foyer of the building. She said she heard moaning coming from the car park. It was then that a man pushed past her and tried to get into the elevator to go down. She screamed to police, "It's him! Go!" 48-year-old Sturt Heron was in front of the elevator when officers approached him. They noticed a large knife covered in blood on the floor next to him. They patted him down and found a blood-covered hammer in his pocket. He was also carrying blood-covered handcuffs, a dog leash, a phone, and a lighter. I stabbed a f***ing ice dealer," Sturt told police, using the street name for methamphetamine. When police got to Nicholas, they saw he had been covered in blood, panting heavily and groaning. He was lying between a wall and his car. When the paramedics arrived, they knew immediately the gravity of the situation. Nicholas's head injuries were gruesome. He suffered extensive blunt force strikes to his head from the hammer, with 14 discrete areas of lacerations to his scalp, skull fractures, and a hemorrhage. He also had 2 stab wounds, one to the right side of his face and another penetrating wound to his abdomen. Despite the efforts of paramedics, they could not revive him. Nicholas was declared dead at 12:45 a.m. The final autopsy report found it was the head injuries that proved fatal. Sturt had driven his white Land Cruiser to the location and parked it near the apartment building. In the center console, police found a notebook containing personal information about Nicholas, including details like his address, movements, and the locations of his valuables and drugs. As he sat detained at the station, Sturt's phone received a text message at 12:05 p.m. that day. "I changed my mind," it said. Nicholas had his own business as a landscaper when the pandemic and lockdowns eliminated his work opportunities. He had thereafter been relying on social security payments from the government to keep him afloat. But that was only part of his income. Because of this unfortunate change of fortune, by the time of his death, he had resorted to selling meth at a low level in his local area to supplement that assistance and support his habit, which he had struggled with for a long time. Nicholas Cameron was born at the beginning of November 1981, the first of 2 children of Mary O'Brien and Christopher Cameron. He grew up in the Warrigal area and went to St. Joseph's Primary School before attending Maris Shawn Catholic College. He was said to be a talented footballer, playing in premiership teams and winning awards for his play. Barely a year prior to his murder, in June 2020, he began a relationship with Marnie, who got pregnant with his child. That child would be born in November 2021, 4 months after he died. Marnie said nothing could describe the pain she felt when he was killed, saying she wakes up in tears on a daily basis. She said she no longer feels safe in her own home and misses him so much. His mother Mary, who was a registered nurse, said all the joy in her life was gone and felt all she could do was clean houses. Everything she does is cast with a shadow of depression and sorrow, she said. She had lost her appetite and dropped so much weight as to become unhealthy. Christopher said his son infused him with pride and joy, including through his involvement in sports, family events, and his loyalty and mateship. Nicholas and his sister Gemma were very close and lived with each other for 3 years in their 20s. She said she was heartbroken and felt empty. She has since been spooked by people she thinks may be following her and won't get out of her car until her garage is closed. The death also crushed his friends. When they looked up Sturt Heron, they saw a man they did not recognize. Digging through the evidence, police discovered that between July 1 and July 2, Sturt had done an internet search for Nicholas's name in his apartment. Then on July 4, he stole a key fob that was housed in a lockbox attached to a power pole, which he used to get into Nicholas's building complex to scope it out. He took the elevator up to the 20th floor and stood outside of Nicholas's door. He took out a weapon from his backpack but didn't enter the apartment. He spent roughly 7 hours around the building, making a visit during that time to the adjacent car park in which he would eventually murder Nicholas. In the notebook found in Sturt's car, police also found information as to the location of 2 of Nicholas's safes in which he held valuables, and the time he would be home. More intriguing were 2 folders found on his phone, one marked as Target and the other marked as Heide. Inside the Target folder were screenshots of an internet listing for Nicholas's apartment and floor plan, and photos of Nicholas and his dog. Inside the Heide folder were photos of the woman, screenshots of Snapchat messages of her talking about Nicholas, and screenshots of messages on the communications application called Kik. The night before Nicholas's murder, Sturt took one last stroll through the apartment complex, this time watching Nicholas exit the apartment to take Misty for a walk. He then sent the following message to an informant. "I just saw the shite bring down Misty for a wee, so I'm going to assume that you're not there anymore and that you're either asleep or busy, so I'll head home. But if you wake up or something and you're up for it, let me know and I'll come back in." Sturt was an average Joe born in Canberra in June 1973. He was one of 4 brothers raised on a small hobby farm outside of the city. He had a good childhood until his parents separated when he was 14 or 15 after his father discovered that his mother was cheating on him. When his father found out, he threw her clothes outside and nailed the front door shut. He threatened the kids that if any of them let her in, he'd shoot them. Young Sturt said he had blamed his mother for the failure of his parents' relationship and didn't talk to her for several years. He softened his position later in life, exchanging communications with her every week. He had lived with his father until he turned 16, when he got up and moved into a group home in the city with hippies who were older than him. He had a close relationship with some of his brothers and not with the others. Sturt hated school and left during his year 9. He completed a diesel mechanic apprenticeship through the Greyhound bus company and drove buses for them. He moved to another bus company and maintained employment there for another decade. In 2009, he was caught up in what was known as the Black Saturday bushfires, which contributed to some post-traumatic stress disorder. Then in 2011, he suffered his first epilepsy seizure, putting him out of the driving business. He worked the next 9 years as a caravan mechanic before he lost his employment after his mental health deteriorated and began drinking heavily. 3 months before the start of the COVID pandemic, he started his own mobile diesel mechanic business. He borrowed thousands of dollars to set it up. By this point, he had lived alone in a house he built on a rural property in Castella, Victoria, which is about 80 kilometers or roughly 50 miles east of Melbourne. Sturt was lonely, and things only got worse for him during the first year of COVID. Starting in February of that year, one of his dogs, who he considered like a child, died. He became very depressed. His partner of 9 years filed for a separation that year, despite his desire to maintain the relationship. He would say that his drinking likely led to him being hard to live with. He had already been divorced from another woman 9 years prior due to him not wanting kids. He said he had not been violent toward anyone prior to the car park incident. With pandemic shutdowns in full swing and the crippling effects they had on the economies of the world, jobs for his business started to dry up, leading to significant financial stress that led to a further decline in his mental health and depression. He would eventually declare bankruptcy. He attempted suicide via overdose on prescription medication. He was thereafter placed in a psych ward. It was against this backdrop that Sturt sought companionship to forget about his struggles with money, business, mental health, and social isolation. I am above you in every single way possible. If you honestly believe that I would be contented by simply punishing you or having you do my dishes, you are truly deluded and entirely living in a fantasy of your own making. You are a pathetic scrap of an excuse mimicking human life. Those were the words that greeted you when you looked up the bio of the username Hedonistic Siren on a website called FetLife, which dubs itself as the most popular social network for the BDSM, fetish, and kinky community. It's also the profile that most attracted a user by the name of Slave Pinto, who was, you guessed it, Sturt. Sturt's profile bio read the following: I pride myself in my service, which includes being her personal play toy, cook, cleaner, masseuse, handyman, builder, and mechanic, among other things. It appeared Sturt, the lonely man that he was seeking more than companionship. He sought a dominatrix, or dom for short. In other words, he sought a woman to treat him like a slave. On or around May 9, 2021, Hedonistic Siren and Slave Pinto would begin communicating. He told her that he was into, quote, humiliation, degradation, objectification, slut, my lady, can't get enough, TPE, bondage, chastity, punishment, sissification. He also told her he liked being forced to do anything my lady desires, with no regard for my opinion or desire. Her reply? Lol, I can work with all of those, ha ha ha. On May 10, 2021, Hedonistic Siren began opening up to Slave Pinto about the difficulties she was having with her boyfriend Chad. She said that while he made her laugh, he also made her feel so dreadful and so insecure and needy and stupid. The communications between the two went on almost every day, multiple times a day. Sturt tuned into her every venting session, seemingly hanging onto her every word. On May 31, Sturt went to meet Hedonistic Siren in person at her apartment in Melbourne's Central Business District, or CBD. He waited outside her apartment for nearly an hour, but she never answered the door. Oh my god, I'm so sorry I fell asleep and didn't hear the buzzer at all. Oh, I feel so terrible, I'm so sorry, she messaged him. He responded, Please don't be sorry, my lady. I will be your slave for life, my lady, whether you want me or not. I will always be here, ready to serve your every command, if you want me, my lady. It is clear that Sturt saw in Hedonistic Siren a way out of his loneliness and spiraling mental health problems. Later that month, she confided in Sturt that Chad was an ungrateful fuckwit. She told him she had a shite time with the old fuckface loser. He's just got a way of hurting me that's very unique and nasty. Sturt replied, Seriously, if you need anything at all, or just want to take your mind off of the shite, or don't want to be alone and just need some company, just let me know. A few months earlier, in September 2020, Nicholas was surfing dating sites. By this point, it's not known what the status was of Nicholas's relationship with Marnie or if she knew about Nicholas's activities. Regardless, it was in that same month that Nicholas found an intriguing dating profile of a woman named Heide Boss. Heide was born in Melbourne in March 1985. Her parents separated when she was 11. Her mother moved to Scotland for a few years and remarried while her father remained single. She had completed half of her year 11 at Doncaster Secondary College, while her older sister ended up becoming a lawyer. On one trip to Scotland when she was 14, she was sexually abused by her stepfather, who was a bad alcoholic and physically violent to her. Her stepfather was a serial sex offender in the 80s, having faced charges of rape and other sexual offenses against 3 women. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison with a non-parole period of 11 years back then. Heide returned to Australia to live with her father before leaving school at 16 and returning to Scotland to live with her stepfather and mother again. But her plan all along was to get out of her mother's home. In Scotland, she studied and then started work in the field of hairdressing. To get out of her living arrangement, she met a car repair guy named Keith. They got married in 2002 and had a son together. The pair had been together for 16 years before separating. 4 months after the split, in 2017, Keith was killed in a road accident. Heidi's mental health declined rapidly after Keith's death. She had suffered flashbacks, nightmares, insomnia, anxiety, and panic. She began to emotionally distance herself from her family, including her son. Her son left the home to live with Heidi's father. Heide then moved on to another man in an on-again, off-again relationship that ran for 12 months. She reported that he consumed meth and was physically violent toward her. Needless to say, that relationship also didn't last. By the age of 26, she had established her own hairdressing business, which was also a victim of the first pandemic lockdown. She closed shop and rented a chair in Brunswick, which was also turfed by another lockdown. She had been collecting COVID payments from the government and had plans to convert a part of her apartment into a salon. By the time she met Nicholas on the dating site, she was living alone in an apartment in Melbourne's CBD. At this point, Nicholas was himself out of work, consuming and dealing drugs to make an income. Heide herself had started on cannabis at 14 and then later tried a bit of methamphetamine, which became a daily occurrence of 3 or more grams per day. She had also taken ecstasy and LSD. Heide also had some self-image issues. She had been consuming slimming medication, with her weight fluctuating drastically over time. She had been prescribed antidepressant Lexapro, and she had already tried committing suicide after what she believed was postnatal depression. Heide would stay at Nicholas's apartment around 3 to 5 nights a week. With a mix of mental health issues, drugs, and unstable employment, things got a bit hairy between the new couple. Heide said that while Nicholas was nice and understanding, he allegedly belittled and was controlling toward her, but he would never get violent. Heide herself was verbally abusive to Nicholas as well. As such, Heide had a strange relationship with Nicholas. She both loved him and hated him for his alleged negative treatment of her. The relationship would fluctuate between brutal verbal encounters and love and support. She described him as having a Jekyll and Hyde personality, and friends described their fights as really terrible. A friend described an occasion when Nicholas buzzed her apartment door between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. He also had a criminal history for family violence. They had periods of estrangement, with each knowing that they were probably seeing other people on the side. Despite the difficulties, the relationship endured. Days before the murder, on July 1, Sturt went to Hedonistic's apartment. Also present was another man she was seeing on the side, but he's not an important character here. By this point, Sturt had been giving Hedonistic Siren money, the most notable transaction being the $2,000 for her rent, part of the privilege to play slave in this weird game. The purpose of the rendezvous was to discuss Chad. Specifically, Hedonistic Siren wanted Chad to skip town, but she didn't want the incident coming back to her. She inquired about whether Sturt could be her muscle to do the deed. Being the good slave that he was, Sturt reassured his dominatrix that he'd done this kind of thing before. He had a tendency to be very persuasive, he would say, and that he would ensure Chad would be hurt and in pain but would be able to leave within 12 hours. In fact, he convinced her that he was part of some biker gang. He told her, 99.9% certain I can convince him never to contact you or speak about you ever again, my lady. Lol. That day, Hedonistic Siren received a message from Chad, who falsely accused her of stealing cash and drugs from him. He called her a master slut, a manipulator, and a sad piece of work, and that she had done a good job of fucking up his life. She sent the messages to Sturt, who saw this as problematic. In this type of dominant, subservient relationship, there's an alignment of emotions. The master's feelings are effectively the slave's feelings. I wish I could come and give this cunt a good kick-in, Hedonistic Siren said of Chad. I'd love him to watch while we took all the valuation out of the apartment. He accused me of stealing such little things which I never did. I always said if I were to take from him, I would fucking take everything from him. Cunt. On July 8, the plan was set. They agreed to bash Chad, steal his valuables, and potentially kidnap him. At the same time, Heide was staying over at Nicholas's apartment the night of July 8. The next morning, they got into another argument. Heide couldn't put up with it, so she left at lunchtime, but the argument continued over text. Nicholas accused her of fishing for an argument, saying it was because of her mental health. Heide shot back, accusing him of gaslighting her and of seeing other women. Nicholas eventually relented and suggested he could give her a massage to make up, but she rejected the offer. Hours later, just after 8 p.m., Sturt had set up on Sturt Street near a red car he thought was Chad's rental. More than 2 hours later, realizing that he had the wrong car, he entered the building's car park, walked up the ramp to the 3rd level, and spotted what he now believed was a red rental. He then waited. That night, Heide messaged Nicholas and asked if he wanted to come over to her place at 12:30 a.m. He replied, "Maybe, cunt." What she did not know at the time was that Nicholas was already about to walk outside of his apartment into an ambush. Sturt said he had a very brief conversation with Nicholas before shoving him against a car and telling him, "You and me gotta talk." Nicholas told him to fuck off before throwing a punch at Sturt. That's when they started scuffling and it all turned to shite. After the attack, police needed to get a fulsome picture as to why this all happened. When searching Sturt's phone, police found messages between Heide and Nicholas, including ones in which Nicholas calls her a slut and a thief. Police asked if Heide would provide a statement. She said that she didn't know who the Sturt guy was, but she did tell police on July 24 that she knew Nicholas's lockbox, which housed his apartment key fob, was stolen 2 days before his murder. But the police would discover something strange. Heide told a friend that Nicholas parked the rental car in a space allocated to another apartment and that the killer was probably waiting in the corner of the car park. Those were details that weren't in the media. Less than 2 weeks later, on August 4, police made another startling discovery. It was a bank statement that showed a transaction in the amount of $2,000. The sender was Sturt. The recipient? Heide. It was her rent money. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. Heide was hedonistic siren. Chad was the name given to Nicholas, who had no idea she was communicating with this Sturt guy. It was alleged Nicholas was in possession of intimate videos of Heide that he had shared with people. She wanted him to stop sending them out. She claimed to just want to move on with her life and wanted Nicholas to get out of town. Heide gave Sturt the code to the lockbox to scope out the apartment. Heide gave him the messages Nicholas was sending her. Heide gave him details of the location. She knew Sturt, in his desperation to see through a relationship with her, would do anything for her. But she didn't want Nicholas to die. In fact, she sent that text to Sturt later on in the day that he was murdered to call off the plan because she changed her mind and wanted to be with Nicholas. Apparently, she was in the dark as to what was going on that night, even though Sturt sent her a photo of the red car in the car park and she reportedly sent a text back saying, "Nice." Sturt would have you believe he also didn't want him dead. He said he meant to use the knife to scare Nicholas and the hammer to smash the memory cards with Heide's videos on them. But Nicholas fought back. Sturt described a man with the strength of 10 men. That's when he said things got out of hand. The harebrained scheme was a disastrous failure. Then again, you could argue it was doomed from the start. Heide didn't see Sturt as a romantic partner at all, while Sturt saw her as such and loved the attention she gave him, having been lonely for a good part of his life. He told his lawyer that he was legitimately worried about Heide's safety. Sturt said he considered contacting police about Heide's safety, but she did not want police involved because she said she would likely be slut-shamed because of her online profiles. Heide would tell police that she was sure that Sturt wouldn't harm Nicholas to the degree he did, saying as a subservient, "I expect him to do what he is told." Sturt had tried to take his own life while incarcerated, which required resuscitation and blood transfusions. He expressed heightened stress, anxiety, sleep disturbance, and poor concentration. He said he had been having nightmares about the night of the murder. He also said he was bloody naive about the whole scenario and didn't consider the consequences and the ways it could go wrong. He said he wished he never went to the apartment that night. Sturt pleaded guilty to murder. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison with a mandatory period of 15 years before parole eligibility. The court accepted that while Heide took part in the planning, she did not know it would lead to Nicholas' death. It also accepted that she was extremely psychologically fragile and that she was at the end of her tether at the time. It also gave her credit for no prior convictions and that, minus drug use, it is very unlikely she would commit such an offense or any other offense of violence again. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months with a non-parole period of 3 years and 3 months. Misty was found unharmed in the apartment complex the night of the murder. Despite being close with Heide, her sister has refused to speak with her since she was charged. Her son has also declined her calls from prison, which the court recognized saddened and distressed her. And finally, the court drew on a 1974 song called "Leave Love Enough Alone" to describe what Sturt may have wished to do. Quote, "He could have known enough of love to leave love enough alone." Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me narrate this story, which is based on the primary sources. Special thanks to the reporters who enlightened us on these cases first, and to you guys for engaging in the subject matter. Be well, feed the poor, be vigilant online, and don't be Sturt or Heide.